Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Solution Spotlight, LLM-Powered Industrial Data Visualization, Accelerating Insights with Today's AI Tools. My name is Molly Colwell, and I'll be one of today's presenters. I've been utilizing ParkView tools for nearly a decade now and have worn many hats while at dataPARC, one of them being an implementation engineer, installing the software and training customers, to marketing and applications engineer, ensuring that our customers are getting the most out of our tools. I'm excited to be joined today by Richard Chinnis from Port Townsend Paper Company. He is the Director of Process Optimization. He's well established in the pulp and paper world and has been working with ParkView since 1999. He continues to try new things, and we're excited to have him share what he's learned today. Before we get too far into it, just wanted to review the types of webinars we have. So we have 3 different types of webinars: our Industrial Data Insights, our dataPARC Universities, and our Solution Spotlights. The Industrial Data Insights are high concepts. The dataPARC Universities get into the nitty-gritty on how to actually use the ParkView tools, and the Solution Spotlights are more conceptual. We show you what is possible. So today we have a Solution Spotlight. It will be available on our community forum and on YouTube afterwards, and we'll definitely send you a link with the recording as well. A little housekeeping. There is a question box. If you have questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to ask questions in there, and we'll do our best to get to them at the end of the webinar. If we can't get to them, we will send you an email afterwards. So for our agenda today, we're going to start with the dataPARC graphics and Park task. We want to talk to you about the main applications we're working with in graphics, and we're using the LLMs to help us build these applications on. So give you a foundation if you haven't worked too much with our graphics designer and Park task. Then we'll discuss the power of LLMs and go into some use cases that we have actually used these LLMs for. And we'll wrap up with our takeaways and tips and have time for Q&A. Let's get into it. Starting with our Park Graphics Designer, this is a location where you can create interactive dashboards. At its base level, this is where we can create live dashboards, and you can click and drag and put tags on there so you can see live data. That's its basic, most simple form. In the back here, we can see that there's a process dashboard, so you can see process flow. We have different tanks on here. So instead of just seeing the tank level, we actually see the tank level over time with a trend tank level. So now we're starting to get a little more complex. Instead of just seeing the single real-time value, we can see a little history in there as well. This dashboard in the back is also dynamic because we have links and buttons on the right-hand side. So we're starting to build a more dynamic dashboard. These can be more and more complex and actually become applications. And that's what we're kind of building to. And with the coding in the background, they can become those complex applications. So this example in the front, we actually have a message that says, something is complete. We want to check. Before we continue to run. So we can click OK and continue on the process. We can create timers or sign-in buttons with these graphics. We can create a button to kick off a workflow, which we'll look at workflows in the next slide, or we can create a button to run a report. You can create a button to change the color or visibility of an object, or change the color or visibility based on a tag value. So something that we've done a lot with these process dashboards is toggle the visibility of the pipes. And we've done that because pipes can, there's a lot of pipes happening. And so if you toggle on and off the visibility, you can, this can be a really good learning tool, and you can clearly see what pipes are going where, but maybe you only want to see the water lines, or you only want to see the process lines. So by toggling them on and off, you're able to see those more clearly. So we're able to turn these process dashboards or these just display dashboards into full applications by having code behind them. And you can really say, how do I want to seed the data into how do I want to troubleshoot and dig into the data? And that's what we're going to look into today. The next one I want to talk about is our workflow designer. Now, this one is a little more niche and people might not have seen it before. So the top view is our actual workflow designer. And this is going to be creating reoccurring tasks. So you can do this by using blocks or code to design the tasks, and they're going to be triggered based on a schedule or something else. So the schedule can be a hourly or maybe based on a shift schedule. It can be once a month or annually, something like that. So just a time schedule. Or it could be triggered based off an alarm. So I have the alarm config window, and that's how you can set up the workflow. You can also watch a folder or a file. So if a folder has files that are being fed into it, maybe you have data being added to it, you can watch that folder for new files entering. When a new file enters, then it kicks off a workflow and something happens with that file. Or maybe you have a single file that has data being entered into that file. Again, you watch that file, see if that timestamp changes, and then you do something with that file. So some examples of what we might use Park Task Workflow for is scheduling emails. Maybe you want to schedule a screenshot of a graphic. You can send that at the start of every shift. And you can use HTML to schedule, to view that email or to create that code for the email. You could do an alarm trigger for a downtime to send a monthly downtime report to the shift supervisor. You could upload data to a database when it enters a folder. You could go out and grab data via an API, like weather data from a website every few hours, and put that into your database, and now you have that in ParkView to view that data. Additionally, you could check emails for an attachment and save it locally, which is a example that Richard is going to share with us in a minute. So just wanted to give a little bit of background about the two main applications we're going to talk about with coding and talking about LLMs as some background. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Richard to talk about the LLMs.
Thanks, Molly. Yeah, so we're not really going to talk about what LLMs are, or at least not deeply what they are. So I'll just kind of summarize it here on this first slide. LLM stands for large language model. We usually think of models like numerical models. You put some numbers in, and if you've built your model of your process correctly, the numbers that come out would predict what the process would do numerically. Well, a language model is a similar thing. Language goes in, and this model is built to predict what the next bit of language would be, or what the appropriate conversation would look like. Now, most of them maybe that we have experience with are outputting English. They're taking English in and they're outputting English. Well, what's useful for us here is a different language, right? XAML or VB.NET. They're coding languages that are mingled in or mixed in or described by natural language. So that's the quick summary, and the reason we can use LLMs in a technical setting is not because they're producing English or producing some other spoken language, but because they're producing a coding language. So the power of using LLMs related to dataPARC and ParkView is that for most users, I would say it breaks the code barrier. I'm trained as a chemical engineer. I'm not trained as a computer scientist. I was not trained to write software. But there are some very powerful tools in ParkView that if you can write code, ParkView becomes even more useful to you, even more powerful in your environment. And so for me, an LLM is something that does break that code barrier, where I can describe my idea in natural language, and then the LLM can give me some code back that might implement that or put that idea into code so that it is then active in a graphic or in a Park task. It does speed up development. I would say that really is kind of the second step, because initially there's a learning curve, right? You have to learn, where does code go? What does code look like? What's great about using LLMs with ParkView, though, is you don't have to have your full degree in computer science or in coding or even in learning all the syntax of a particular language. Once you understand where the code goes and you get a feel for what routines are and functions are and imports are and things like that, it really does speed up development. I would say most of the projects I've had in ParkView are half-day projects. I have an idea and I sit down in the afternoon with the LLM and I go back and forth, and by the end of the day, I've got something that works. Larger projects can obviously take longer, but if I had to know and understand VB.net and code it from my own knowledge, it would never happen. I don't have the time, I don't have the capacity to learn that. And then improving the building experience, I would say in that list of faster testing, debugging, and iterating, the debugging really is the key for me. Say I put the code in and I test it and I get an error. Well, I can take that error because it's in language, right? It's in terms of words, and I give that error back to the LLM, and the LLM can then provide, oh yes, I see where there's a mistake on this one line of code. Here, this solution should fix that error. And you can iterate back and forth rather than browsing and searching the whole web for your specific error and then trying to interpret it in your specific environment. The LLM already knows the code, and then now it sees the error. So it really makes the building experience much faster. And on the right-hand side in this screenshot here, you see an example, right, of a prompt and then the code that comes back from the LLM. You tell the LLM what language you're using. You tell the LLM very specific details like the formats of dates, and it can respond and give you code that works for your natural language. It can respond back with a code language that does what you're asking. So some more benefits of LLMs: unlocking creativity. I would say for me, not being a very creative person, the LLMs have actually helped me improve my creativity. I will often ask the LLM, what is the right way to view this kind of data? Or this is how I'm viewing the data. Can you improve upon this? Other people, I would say more normal people, you already have in your mind exactly the right way to see this. And you know how it's going to be best viewed by other people. You know what you want to present. Well, you just need to get that into code, right? And the LLM allows you to do that. You can describe that to the LLM and it can say, oh yes, we can do that in XAML, we can do that in VB.net, and then you can use that code in ParkView. Custom displays, as Molly mentioned earlier, most graphics, even for me, most graphics I build are just displaying current data. I might have some trends on the graphic, but it's mainly a process flow diagram. It's used for education or troubleshooting. When things go wrong, you're trying to understand the process. But these displays can become much more, especially when you start putting the code behind the graphic. For example, you can have interaction, you can have hidden displays that become visible when you click buttons, you can have hidden things that become visible only on certain instances or certain actions, certain activities. You can make things multi-threaded. If there's a routine of getting data that takes a very long time, you can multi-thread these things. Really, the limits are almost boundless, because really whatever libraries are available in VB.net are available in the graphic and available in ParkTask. And then finally, empowering more team members. Again, if it helps me, who knows no code, to code something that is functional and works, well, then it has the same impact for the rest of the team. There still doesn't have to be one person who knows how to do code behind. All you really need is someone who is creative and understands what they want from a graphic or from a ParkTask. And then with the help of the LLM, they can also do the same kind of customization. So these are just some of my essentials that I would say I use consistently when prompting LLMs with dataPARC or ParkView in mind. I always, the graphics are WPF based. So they have XAML for the front end and they have VB.net code for the back end, the code behind. That is how I always begin my prompt. I am creating a WPF application with VB.NET code behind. The reason for that is it changes the libraries that would be used. So if you just ask the LLM, I need you to code this, it may code it in Windows Forms. Well, Windows Forms is not exactly compatible with WPF. You need Windows controls in WPF. A lot of times the code that it would give me would be Visual C. And so I would have to go back and say, no, change all the code you've just given me, rewrite it in VB.NET. Well, I just put that in my prompt now, right up at the very beginning. Also, by telling it it's a WPF application, it knows that if there's any front-end controls it needs to code, it already knows to code it in XAML. Again, I mentioned multi-threading earlier. This is something that I've learned the hard way. Is I had in my head, oh, this needs to be multi-threaded. And so I went through the pain of forcing an application or a graphic to use multi-threading, only to find out it didn't improve the user experience at all. I mean, it was multi-threaded, it functioned, but it didn't help because all of the tasks had to fire synchronously. So it loaded all the tasks up in a multi-threaded fashion, but they were all awaiting each following task. So again, I tell the LLM, use multi-threading if it will improve the user experience. Here's another example, right? dataPARC, the interpreters in dataPARC behind graphics and the interpreter for Park task doesn't recognize the interpolated string notation, which is really using the $sign. And if you look over in the prompt on the right, you can say, don't use $signs. That's how because I always forget the phrase interpolated string notation. I will never remember that, and I don't know why. I just tell the LLM, don't use $signs for strings. And it responds back, oh, I will stop using interpolated string notation, right? So it has a better grasp on that even than I do. For Park tasks specifically, sometimes I've made the mistake of telling the LLM, I want to schedule a task that does this. And it gives me all the code back for actually creating a scheduler. Well, that's not what I want for Park task. Park task is the scheduler on the server. So instead, I've begun telling the LLM, I want a single iteration of a task that will be given to a scheduler. So I do inform the LLM that the code is going to be inside a scheduling program so that it knows this is not standalone code. And that has helped me some in the past. But if you're trying to code for Park task, just be aware, if you tell the LLM you want to schedule something, it's going to write a lot of code that implements a scheduler that you don't really need. Okay, so here's an example of maybe some code that we get back, right? So things to be aware of are import statements, right? When Claude or Gemini or any of these models write code, they've gotten pretty good about telling you what import statements are necessary for the classes and the properties and the methods that are used down below. Now, some of those are repeated because maybe when you go into the code behind a model, behind a graphic, you can see, oh, there are quite a few imports already there. Well, the LLM may not know that, and so it just includes a full list. So really, you're just looking for the differentials. You're looking for what's different. Also, what will come back is when you tell the LLM, I'm creating a WPF application with VB.NET code behind, it will often give you the entire VB.NET code required in something like Visual Studio. So it will have things like a public class main window. It will have things like a public sub new, because those are necessary parts of a full application. Well, those things or their corollaries exist already in the code behind of a Park graphic. So you need to ignore the main window, and you don't need to ignore the sub new. You just don't want to copy that. What you need to do is take what's inside there. So there are routines or functions that are called inside the public sub new, and just put those, when you go into the code behind the graphic, put those in the display created subroutine. That way they get executed once, which is exactly what the LLM was intending by putting them in the public sub new. Another thing to remember is to make sure that the LLM is aware. dataPARC graphics start with a canvas. That's the base control. Well, that's not necessarily true for all WPF applications. Well, so it's important that the LLM knows everything in this application lives in a canvas. And that does affect the code quite a bit, both on the XAML side and on the VB.NET side. You can, as we see, XAML versus VB.NET here, the third point, you can actually tell the LLM, I want you to give me the XAML that implements these controls. You know, I want a text box here, I want a button here, and you can describe the types of controls you want, and it can actually give you the XAML. It doesn't have to only give you the code behind. It's just another language, right? You can test code and graphics. This is, I mean, absolutely necessary. I must do this 500 times a day. When you have the code open, you hit build first, look for any errors in the build. If there are, go back to the LLM and tell the LLM, hey, here's the error. And it can sort it out pretty quick. You can also run and debug, and it'll put up a window of the application in a temporary window, and you can see the debugging and you can see any errors it's giving, so you can interact with it and make sure the interactions are all working. That is a key part of working with this LLM to get it functional, is using it in debug mode and feeding back to the LLM what you see. So yeah, there are a couple of limitations. One is none of these LLMs are going to be aware of dataPARC controls, not going to be aware of dataPARC classes, not going to be aware of the methods and properties associated with these things. So you have to understand some of that and just realize that what the LLM is going to give back to you are the commonly known, I would say publicly available from Microsoft controls and classes. And the last thing I'll say about the code is security. Don't ever just blindly copy and use code, even if it's hundreds of lines of code. Make sure that you read through the code. You don't have to understand in detail absolutely everything that's happening. But if you see something that looks suspicious, you can just go right back to the LLM and say, I don't understand this line. I've done that many times. And it says, oh, here's why I'm using that line, right? The reason you don't want to just blindly use code is because these are models that are created by people who are not in your company, which means you're relying on an outside source for code that's going to be executed at your facility. Well, that's kind of important, right? You want to make sure that you've put eyes on all of this code and made sure that it's not something nefarious. And it doesn't have to be something that would even damage your company. It would just have to be something that would say, take your data and email it off to someone else, or upload it to a server that maybe you're not aware of. It could be just one single line. So I'm not trying to scare you off from using it. I use LLMs for code all the time, but I do read every single line. It's not just a blind copy and paste. Okay, so we're going to look at a few use cases. I think I'm going to go through two, and Molly has a demo and another use case, and I'll get us started off here. I think Molly mentioned this earlier, pulling data from the cloud like APIs. So what I'm finding in Mills is that our vendors are bringing in skids, right? These skids with lots of instruments on them, and maybe they're testing a sewer stream, or they're testing a feed water source or whatever. And there's a lot of good data there. And that data is getting sent back to the vendor over cellular. And so they have all this data, and maybe they send an email with trends in it. I'm like, oh, wow, that's great data. Where do I get that? And then they send me a link, a web link, and I can click on it and I can see the data, but now it's not in ParkView, and I can download it if I want to and put it in Excel, but it's a pain. So in every instance where I've run into that, those vendors provide APIs. They say, if you want to get the data, well, here's our API definition. So more code, right? And every API is different. Well, here's the solution. You can actually take the document that they give you, as long as that document isn't specific to your facility or specific to your company. You don't want any of your authentication information in there. This is just the generic API definition. You can give that to the LLM and say, hey, I want you to write a VB.NET connector for this API. And that would typically go in Park task, right? That would not go in, I mean, you could put it in a graphic if you wanted to pull live data into a graphic, but again, that's not super useful. You already have that with a web browser. So this would be an instance where you create a Park task, you use this API connector to go out and get data and just save it to a flat file that can be parsed either in that task or by another task. So, and I've done this, I mean, I would say a dozen times now. I use Claude typically, sometimes Gemini 2.5 Pro, although I haven't used it much, but I hear GPT-5 is fantastic at code. So they're all really good at this and easily available. I use Claude Sonnet most of the time, and I have a separate Park task that I've written that is just an MDE insert task. That's the only thing it does. And each trigger is looking at a different folder. And if a file shows up in the folder, it picks it up and puts it in. And the reason I used MDE is because there's a stored procedure in the config database that pushes data into MDE tables. So it was easy for me. So this is a specific example. This was probably, well, I would say the second toughest one to do. The vendor gave me a 20-page PDF. And it was very intense. It was very detailed. And I had heard, okay, Claude is good at coding, but Gemini 2.5 Pro particularly is good at building applications from scratch. So I said, all right, I'm going to give it a shot. I gave the API to Gemini 2.5 Pro and said, write a VB.NET connector that gets all the data possible from this API. It gave me back 500 and some lines of code. I did not even try it. I didn't even attempt to run it. I took all the code and the API definition. I gave both of them to Claude Sonnet. And I told Claude Sonnet, this is a first draft. This is a rough draft of a VB.NET connector for this API. Fix everything that's wrong, fix all the syntax errors, and add error handling, and add robustness and safety, and whatever else is needed to make this a robust, production-ready connector. And what I got back from Claude, I know this is hard to believe, and I will tell you, this is not normal, okay? But what I got back from Claude worked the first time. I took all of the code that it gave me, and the only thing I changed was I put in my authentication parameters for the API. And the very first time I ran it, I had data in flat files on my server that pulled from that API. And it was over 900 lines of code total. So Gemini had written about 500 and some, Claude added about 400 and some. And in fact, I will say this is, I think, the only time that it worked first time. It just happened to be 900 lines of code. That's unusual. Do not expect that. But I wanted to put this in here as a little plug to say these models are getting very, very good, especially with APIs and especially with APIs. I had told it the format. I said, just write out a timestamp and a value, because that's what my MDE insert task, right, a separate task, is looking for. Well, all of that was successful on the very first try. Not only had I run the connector and pulled the data, but it had written it out in the correct format that it could be ingested by the MDE insert task. So here's another example. I would say very different, but it is pulling data from the cloud. We have some, I would say, service email accounts that really just receive daily emails or hourly emails or whatever from vendors, or might have pricing information or might have trend data or something. And it was very frustrating trying to put together a trend of that when you had to go back through emails, open PDFs, open attachments, put, transcribe the number into Excel. It was just a mess, okay? So what I decided to do is I said, okay, well, there's, Office 365 is an Azure app or something like that. It resides in the cloud. It's out there in the ether, right? So that means there's some way for me to interface with it. Well, so I wrote a Park task that uses the Office 365 API, our authentication information that all comes from our Office system with IT, It's specific to this user, this little service user. And it goes out and it just checks the inbox for unread messages. And if it finds an unread message with the right subject and it has attachments, well, then it just downloads that attachment and saves it locally. And then I have separate tasks that process PDFs and process whatever to put it in, again, into a flat file that the MDE insert picks up and puts into the historian. So the nice thing about this is the Microsoft documentation for their API and how to do this, even though it is really, again, I'm not a coder, okay? In my life, it's very complicated. But it's so well documented that, again, the LLMs know how to write this stuff. And again, you see it underlined and in all caps there. Never, ever, ever, ever put authentication information into the chat. You know, just use like a string of pound signs or, you know, a string of zeros or ones or something if you need something that's a placeholder. The reason to do that is even if the providers are saying, oh, we don't keep your data, we're not going to train on your data, it's still something you're trusting them to follow through on. And you're trusting that the stream is not being intercepted. It's not being used by someone else. Never, ever put authentication information into those chats. At least I've been able to successfully do this without ever putting authentication information in there. So now the result is we have this vendor pricing over time. It's a Park View tag. I can trend it with all the other process data and everything else. Oh yeah, so at Port Townsend, at this point, we have 4 different cloud APIs. We got a total of MDE imports. We're pulling in weather information like high temperatures, wind, GS data like river flows and river heights and things like that that are pertinent to the mill. It's not just, oh, hey, this is cool, but we can actually see the state and the stage of the rivers that are feeding us our water. Okay, so here's another example. Okay, MDEs can be used to store data on products, right? You have a product ID and you might have all this manual testing that's associated with each product. Well, rather than going into Tag Browser or going into Excel and putting on a trend and trying to find the data that lines up with a certain product, you can build a graphic where you just give the product ID to the graphic. And then all of the manual data entry associated with that product ID comes back to you. And an example on the right-hand side, you can see all these desserts, right? There's 3 different grades of dessert, but within each grade, each one is what we would say is a product, and it has its own product ID. So the grade might be red velvet, apple, or chocolate, and then the product IDs might, you know, 01, J007. That would be the product ID for that velvet cake. Well, we want to know, like, what properties did that particular cake have when it was tested, right? And that would be associated with a product ID and MDE. So here's the solution. You can create a graphic where you type in 01J007, for example, and you press the button, and magically, right, all of the data associated with that one product comes back to you, and it tells you, you know, was the color good? Was the poofiness or whatever of a cake? I don't know what you measure a cake. You know, did it look good? Did it taste good? Did it smell good? You know, all of the manual data comes back, right? You would use, again, I would use Claude for this. I'm not paid by Anthropic, so I'm not trying to steer everyone to Claude. I'm just giving you my personal experience. Claude Sonnet is one I typically go to. For this kind of graphic, you do need to know something about the SQL table structure in the CTC config database. The dataPARC folks can help you with that, either the engineers or the support team. You'll have to have an additional connection. Again, this additional connection is not like some kind of duct tape thing. It's built in. It's something you can turn on, and it makes the database available, but it's something you need to work with the dataPARC folks on, because it could be a security risk if you don't open it up correctly. It needs to be kept secure, so they can help you with that additional connection. And then you can tell the LLM how you want to view this, and it can give you XAML. You can tell it how you want it to, what the experience to be like, and you can get the vb.net for the experience, copy the XAML, copy the vb.net, and you just copy and paste. So this might be a sketch that you have of what you want, right? So you have in your head, again, we talked about this earlier, you know what you want it to look like. And so you sketch this up maybe in PowerPoint or in Paint or something, you've just kind of drawn it. Well, one of the great things about these frontier models in particular is that they're multimodal, which means there's multiple modes of interacting. It's not just language, you can interact visually. Well, you can take screenshots of something like this and give it to the LLM with your natural language prompt and say, this is the layout, this is the coloring, this is the font, this is the structure that I want to see in the final product. And it can give you back the XAML for this, and it can give you back the VB.NET that accomplishes the interactivity. So this, again, for me, is really powerful because if I see something I like, I don't have to spend 5 paragraphs describing it in English. I can just take a shot of it and say, this is what I want. And then I can use the natural language to describe more of the activity. So I think this is one that Molly is going to give us a demo on what it looks like and how it interacts.
Yeah, we can jump into ParkView and see what it looks like. So we have this real ID lookup, and my test real ID is 123. So I can just type that in here and hit search. And then I get all of my products or all of my tags in here with the results. And you can see that um, I'm getting my text tags here, as well as my numeric tags and my date time tag. So I was able to pull in all the different types of tags. And then we also were able to pull in a search result. So you know that you're looking for a tag that has the word tag in it. You can just type in tag and it will actually highlight all of the tags with tag in there. And then if you have a different one, you can just type that in and hit search again, and it will pull up. Now, this is actually looking at all across all MDEs. So it's not looking at one specific MDE, it's looking at the product label across all MDEs. So that's what this one is doing specifically. If you wanted to look at one specific MDE, that would just be the SQL query, and that you would just edit that down. Great. And our last example is actually a downtime photographic that was made. So a lot of the times when we have when there's a downtime, people take photos of the downtime. So whether that's they find the root cause or maybe they find a fix, they're out on the floor and they're taking photos of the issue. Or maybe they have a file that's associated with the fix. A work order that they want to associate with the downtime or some other piece of information. And they didn't have a good place to attach this to the downtime, and there's no way for them to reference this with the downtime. And then a month later, you're like, oh, I remember this happened a month ago, and Randy has that on his phone. He has a picture of that and he has the solution, but Randy's not here today, or I don't have a way to get this on the computer. I don't know where that picture is. So what the solution there was to create a folder structure that would actually link the downtime to the start time of the event, and then people would be able to upload files or images into this folder, and then that would link to the downtime. So if you needed to go back and look at that information, you would have that. So the first step here was to use Park Task and our alarms to auto create a folder every time there was a downtime. And we created the structure with the um, process area so that we wouldn't have too many folders in one area. So we had downtime images, then process area, and then the downtime start time as the folder name. And then users would upload files or images into that start time area. And then our graphic was to create a timeline, and very much like our trend, which has our, start and end time. We want it to look very similar to like our current trend with the start and end time. You could click on it, showed us our downtime, reason, start and end time, any comments, but we also wanted to link up that file folder. So we used, again, Park Task Workflow, Alarm, Graphics Designer, Claude, and SQL knowledge as well. Again, that additional connection is required for this because we're pulling information from the SQL table for those alarm events. Okay, and this is the vision I had for what I wanted the graphic to look like. So wanted to drop a downtime tag in there and refresh it, to then get this timeline that very much looked like the current ParkView timeline, sans the trend on top. So we had a box for each downtime event, but then I wanted it to be green when we had images in there and gray when there were no images. And then when you clicked on a box, I wanted to see the start and end time, the reason, the comments, everything that you see in a current ParkView trend when you click on that downtime. But I also wanted to see the images, and then when you click on the image, it would show up. So in order to tackle this, I actually started, sort of from the top down, and really started with the timeline with no colors. So I said, first build me, a text box with a refresh button and a timeline that's black with gray boxes that are clickable. Um, Within the box, when I click on it, I want the start and end time, the reason, the comment, um, and that information. So that's what I started with, and I tested that. And once that worked, then I connected the start time to the file, the start time of the downtime to the file folder. And I said, if there are any files associated, then actually turn the box green. So then we were trying to get that, then I was trying to get that working. And then if there are any files, make them appear in this box as well and have them clickable. So this wasn't one very long prompt. I actually did it in 2 or 3 stages, to get it working because thought that it was going to be too much at once. So you can break it down, what is going to work, test it, hit run and debug, and then move on to the next stage, see if you can break it down. So with that, we can jump into ParkView and look at all of the sections. So the first one is alarm config. And we'll just look at the downtime tag. So to set up a park task workflow with downtime, it's in this window. And we actually have quite a few set up, which is awesome. You can have multiple, but excuse me, our option here is the downtime folder with images. And you have this drop down and you just select the one you want. And for this, we actually need to select a process area, and that will choose what folder all of the start time folders are going to go into so that we're not having a huge list for all the different process areas. So with this one, we're getting information from our alarm data, and we're just going to get the process area. So that's really simple. And then we're going to execute this when the alarm is detected. So that was really the simple step and an out-of-the-box solution within ParkView. And we can see that our downtime images folder is here. So it's just within our ParkView displays. And we have our process area for boiler, PM2, and then we have all of our downtime images. So we chose to do the full year, 2025. You could just do the 2-date year for 25, the full month, day, and then underscore hour, minute, second. So that's how we chose to do this example. And then files can be within here. And then we can just pull up that Park task really quick to show you how it's actually a fairly simple Park task. I have this execute once here just to test it, so it's actually not needed anymore. But the script is what was used to build those folders. So then I just go here and can actually double click to open this up. And you can see that I'm pulling the timestamp from now and writing it as a string, how I want to see it. I am telling it the folder path all the way up until I need to tell it the process area and the stamp, and then I'm creating my folder. So pretty simple. I did, yeah, I personally haven't written code in quite a few years now. So I just threw this in Claude and it spit it out for me. So that was very helpful. Okay, so now we can look at the graphic itself. So downtime images, very simple. One thing I didn't think of is how I was going to go back and forth in time. So after I had my um, initial rotation with Claude, I was like, oh, I need to be able to go back in time. So we put a production time in here, and then I decided I didn't want to see too much time. So I'm just doing one production day at a time from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So I don't have a start and end time. I just have one production day in here. But if you wanted to do something different and be able to see multiple days or a full month, you'd be able to adjust that. So I can pull up Tag Browser and grab my tag, just click and drag like ParkView, and then go to my sample time and hit refresh. And so I have a green sample and a gray one. So if we look at the gray one, I don't have any reason here, but I can see my process area, any comments, the duration, my start and end time, and again, no files associated, which is fine. And then if I go over to my green one, I have my comment that there was a pipe leak that needs to be replaced. It was down for 96 minutes, and then I have my 2 files associated with it. I can move this around and have these open at the same time, so you can have multiple open. But from here, I can open my file, look at my corroded pipe, and open up my other documents. So yeah, this was able to tie in images with the downtime. And then if we wanted to pull in a different tag, I should not double click on it. We can click and drag that in there as well and refresh and pull it over. And you can see that it's actually taking up as much room as the downtime itself. So this is starting, at 10 a.m. relative to 7 a.m. So it is very similar to a trend in ParkView, how we would expect to see that in a trend. Okay, and with that, we'll just go into our key takeaways. So from today, we wanted to express that LLMs are really here to help break down the code barrier. They're going to help those people who aren't super familiar with writing code and but who have the vision on how they want to see the data, how they want to be able to troubleshoot and help create these applications and be able to get you to see that data faster. Both of those graphics that I showed took combined less than 6 hours to create using those LLMs. So it was really, really fast and helped, like I said, create that speed and accessibility. So they can really help speed up these processes and, like Richard said, you know, create all of these wonderful graphics to help you see the data better and troubleshoot when you have all these ideas and you want to see them, but you just don't have the time because without these LLMs, just you wouldn't have the time to build them because they would be hundreds and hundreds of lines of code, and you'd have to know how to write VB.NET and all those things. If you're scripting specifically in ParkView, make sure to say that you're creating with WPF applications with VB.NET code behind, to use multi-threading where when it's helpful not to use those $signs, and to ignore the scheduling. If you're using other applications outside of ParkView, see what prompts are going to be helpful there, and then start small and build confidence. So if these applications looked daunting to you, then start with something smaller and work your way up. Maybe start with the Park task. That Park task I started with was only 10 lines of code. That was the first thing I did with Claude, and then worked up, and I think the MDE was 300 lines, and the other one was closer to 700 lines. So work your way up and build your confidence. And lastly, keep company security in mind. You definitely don't want to put anything proprietary into the LLM. So authentication or anything that you wouldn't want to share with an outside source. Data, won't put tags in there either. So just you can say that you have tag data or something like that, but you don't want to actually put that information in there. And with that, I think we are ready to move into questions. So first off, I'll just start by saying the MDE product search resource is available on the community forum. So I will link this when that email goes out to everyone with the webinars, but it is available right now on the community forum under resources, and you can just download this. Like I said, if you don't have that SQL connection client, that is required to make that work, but it is on the forum. Another question we had is they were hoping to look at some of the code in these and look at the back end a little bit. So I have both of the graphics pulled up, and they do look a little bit different. So the real lookup did have some XAML involved. So we actually have a text box and a rich text box here, but the downtime images has no XAML. So when we open it up in Graphics Designer, it looks like a blank canvas. So depending on how you're using the LLM and if you request that XAML data or not, your canvas can look pretty intimidating because you're doing all of your editing and everything in the code itself. So if we look at the downtime image VB.NET code, we can see our imports and all of our code here. So everything that we saw in the construction of that, where it had the calendar, that is all actually in here and structured in the code in here instead of in the XAML. So that's why this looks like a blank canvas, whereas the other one had stuff in it. Oh, looks like we have another question. Will the LLMs automatically optimize code for performance, or do the prompts need to specifically be requested? Richard, do you want to take that one? Do I need to reread that?
No, yeah, I heard that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say they would optimize for performance um, as if they are trying to write performant code from the start, but it's not top of mind, I guess is the best way to put it. So I have for very long pieces of code, I have taken it back, like a certain function or a certain subroutine or something, and gone back and say, hey, I think this may not be, you know, the most performant code. Can you spot any 80/20 rules, or can you spot any obvious ways that we could make this more efficient without going overboard? You always, because what I have found is if I take code and I say please make this more performant, it will it will create new code, but sometimes it's giving you another 100 or 200 lines of code to squeeze out like 20 milliseconds of execution. So I have found that when I'm asking the LLMs to make the code perform better, that I have to, give it caveats like 80/20 rule or don't go overboard. And it can help if you take that route.
And Richard, how many graphics would you say you've built at this point using LLMs?
Oh man, how many different graphics?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, it's probably 2 or 3 dozen now that
Yeah.
that are actually like published graphics that we use that have code behind them. I don't put code behind every graphic, but when I want to create something like what we've shown here, like something more of a mini application, um, I engage the LLMs right off the bat just because it saves so much time up front.
Awesome. Well, if you're typing in a last minute question, we will definitely get that via email and make sure that that's posted on the forum when we post this. So, Richard, thank you so much for your time, and everyone else, thank you so much for joining us today. We will catch you on the next one. Have a good day, everyone.